When I was 4 months old, my parents left me in a fire station parking lot in Dayton, Ohio. The firefighters said I was wrapped in a threadbare blanket that smelled like cigarette smoke and cheap detergent. No note, no name, just a pink onesie with the initials V.L. stitched on the chest. The state gave me a name, Victoria Lynn, and I grew up in foster care until my grandfather found me at age 7. He was my father's father, Arthur Langford, a quiet, imposing man with the kind of presence that filled a room without words. He'd spent years searching for me, hiring investigators, following every lead. When he finally showed up at the foster home with the adoption papers, I didn't believe he was real. He brought me home to a large, drafty colonial house outside Columbus. It smelled of oak and lemon polish, and it was always too quiet, but it was safe. He never raised his voice, never let me go hungry, never forgot a birthday. He told me my parents were gone, and for most of my childhood, I let that word mean dead. It wasn't until I turned 16 that he told me the truth. Your parents didn't die, Victoria. They walked away. From you, from me. I didn't cry. I just nodded and went back to my room. That night, I sat by the window and watched the rain for hours, thinking how strange it was that you could exist in someone's world so briefly and still be haunted by them forever. When I turned 24, my grandfather got sick, lung cancer. He fought it quietly, stubbornly, as if he could intimidate the disease into retreat. He refused hospice, insisted on staying home. The night before he died, he called me into his study, the one with the heavy mahogany desk and shelves that smelled of tobacco. His hand trembled as he handed me a sealed envelope. "Everything is in there," he said, voice hoarse. "The house, the accounts, the trust. I've made sure you'll never have to depend on anyone." I whispered, "I love you," and he smiled faintly. "I know, sweetheart. Just remember who stood by you when nobody else did." He died 2 days later. The funeral was small, just me, his attorney, and a few of his old friends from the Air Force. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the will was executed, I got a call from a lawyer representing Mr. and Mrs. Daniel and Cynthia Langford. My hand went numb holding the phone. "I don't know those people," I said. The lawyer hesitated. "They claim to be your biological parents." My throat went dry. "Claim?" "Yes," he said carefully, "and they're filing a petition to contest your inheritance of your grandfather's estate. They found me. After 24 years of silence, after abandoning me as a baby, they wanted to sue me for his money. The estate was valued at $3-4 million. The house, the stocks, the farmland. They claimed they were wrongfully disinherited, that my grandfather's mental state was compromised by grief and medication. I saw their faces for the first time in decades when the story hit the local news. They stood on the courthouse steps, arms around each other, pretending to be devastated. My mother, or the woman who'd given birth, was crying into the cameras, saying, "We just want what's fair. We never stopped loving our daughter." My daughter. I almost laughed. The first hearing was surreal. They sat across from me, whispering to their lawyer, not even looking my way. When the judge asked if they'd like to make a statement, my mother stood up, smoothing her skirt, and said, "We made mistakes, Your Honor. We were young, but we've changed. We were deprived of the chance to be a family, and now our father's estate is being unfairly withheld." I stared at her. "You left me in a parking lot." Her lips tightened. "We were scared. We didn't have the means." "You didn't have the means?" I said, my voice shaking. "You had my grandfather, your father, who would have done anything for you. You just didn't want the responsibility." My father's jaw clenched. He muttered something under his breath, something about me being ungrateful. Ungrateful. The case dragged on for months. Their lawyer tried to paint me as a manipulative opportunist who'd taken advantage of an elderly man's affection. They subpoenaed my grandfather's medical records, old journals, even emails. Meanwhile, I started digging. I spent hours in dusty courthouses and libraries, combing through property records, tax filings, old police reports. That's when I found it. a bankruptcy filing from 2003. My parents had defaulted on 2 mortgages, maxed out credit cards, and skipped town to avoid creditors. Worse, they'd forged my grandfather's signature on a loan application for $7,500. He had quietly paid it off to avoid scandal. He'd written "forgiven" across the ledger. Forgiven. But never forgotten. I took that file straight to my lawyer. "I want everything documented," I said. "Every forgery, every debt, every lie." He hesitated. "Victoria, this could get ugly." "Good," I said. "Let's make it uglier." By the second court date, I had everything. The fake loan documents, the abandoned bankruptcy, the eviction notices, and the witness statements from 2 of my grandfather's old friends, both confirming that Daniel and Cynthia had been cut off decades ago for stealing from him. When I walked into that courtroom, I felt like I was walking into a battlefield. My parents didn't even recognize me at first. My hair was darker, tied back neatly. I wore my grandfather's old silver watch. When I finally looked up at them, their faces drained of color. Their lawyer started speaking, but I interrupted. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to submit new evidence into the record." The judge nodded. "Proceed." I handed over the files. "These are signed financial documents and witness affidavits proving a history of fraud, theft, and abandonment by the plaintiffs. These people didn't lose a family. They lost access to a wallet." My mother's voice cracked. "Victoria, you don't understand." "No," I said. "I do. I just stopped caring." The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of papers. Their lawyer flipped through the documents, his expression hardening with every page. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was sharp. "Mr. and Mrs. Langford, unless you can disprove these claims, I suggest you withdraw your petition immediately." They didn't withdraw, they doubled down. Claimed I'd forged the evidence. Claimed I was out for revenge. They shouldn't have said that word. Revenge. It stuck in my head like a challenge. So I gave it to them. I tracked down the journalists who'd covered the story, the same ones who'd painted my parents as victims. I handed them the documents, the proof, the timeline, everything. Within days, headlines flipped. "Parents who abandoned infant now accused of defrauding late veteran father." Langford estate battle exposes decades of lies. The public turned on them overnight. The public turned on them overnight. Their small business, a home renovation company, lost its contracts. Their clients demanded refunds. Their neighbors stopped answering their calls. At the next hearing, they looked broken. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother did, and when she did, I saw hatred there. Not guilt, not sorrow. Hatred. That's when I knew I'd won. Not just the case, but the moral ground they'd buried themselves under decades ago. The judge dismissed their lawsuit with prejudice. The estate remained entirely mine. But I wasn't finished. 2 months later, I sold the house, my grandfather's house, and used part of the money to create the Arthur Langford Foundation, a nonprofit for abandoned children aging out of foster care. The press loved it. I made sure every article mentioned my grandfather's name, his integrity, his loyalty, and I made sure they mentioned my parents' names, too, right beside words like fraud, abandonment, and betrayal. They reached out once after that. A letter handwritten in shaky penmanship. It said, "We lost everything. Are you happy now?" I didn't respond. I just framed the letter and hung it in my office. A quiet reminder that justice doesn't always come from the courts. Sometimes it comes from the slow, deliberate ruin of those who earned it. People ask me sometimes if I ever forgave them. I tell them forgiveness is a luxury for the innocent. They made me an orphan before I could even crawl. They made me fight for every scrap of dignity I've ever had. So when the world finally saw them for what they were, I didn't feel guilt. I felt peace. Because the truth is, they didn't just abandon a baby. They abandoned their future, and I inherited it.